Can you imagine if you treated your spouse and your kids like you treat your best customers, your best donors?
This podcast is brought to you by Blackaby Ministries International. To find out more, visit blackaby.org.
Well, welcome to the Richard Blackaby Leadership Podcast. My name is Sam, and I'm your host, and I'm joined by Dr. Richard Blackaby.
Always a delight to be with you, Sam.
And it's a special delight today when I come over to record, and I'm just assaulted with your baking, which is a very good thing. This new hobby of sourdough that you've embarked upon has led to sourdough cinnamon buns.
Yes,
the recipe
the first
which
time.
you got
I can
from
make
my
them
wife.
better, I think. But today, with first round,
Hey, it's
sourdough cinnamon rolls with a maple cream cheese icing.
yeah.
I'm
gonna have to repent after this, Richard. Like it's
I did go for
So
a hard
much
walk
sugar.
right after they came out of the oven, but yeah, I've been making sourdough bread, which I actually have some of that ready to go in the oven here before long, and then sourdough cinnamon rolls, which they say is one of the healthier kinds of bread to eat, and so I figure why not eat something healthy like a cinnamon roll made out of sourdough. So
yeah. I mean that's got to be healthy, right?
yeah, that's
Because it's sourdough, it sort of cancels out all the
right.
sugar that
That's
you put
right.
in.
Well, and Sam, if our listeners are tuning in today, if you happen to have caught it on the day this is released, I'm actually at the Southern Baptist Convention in Indianapolis this week. And so if you're hearing this and you're just learning that I'm there, we're going to be, the Blackaby Ministries International is going to have a booth in the exhibit hall. Rick Fisher, my son Daniel Blackaby, and his wife Sarah, and some others will all be there. We always stay right next to the Canadian Baptist Seminary and College. My cousin Rob is the president now. He took my place. And so we always share a space. And so Blackaby Ministries and the Canadian Seminary. If you find that, we have maple cookies imported from Canada, and then all kinds of chocolate candies that we just got at a store somewhere. But between maple and chocolate and then riveting conversation with a couple of Blackabys, it makes for just a wonderful, wonderful stop.
It is, yeah. And it needs to be quick, probably too. I would say you don't want to get Rob and Richard going for too long. You might regret it.
People like to come by and thank me for my puns. I've always have some that do that at the convention.
Well, you
that
you shouldn't
warms my
lie,
heart.
Richard. That's
Well, that's what they do.
Yeah.
I'm just reporting the news.
Well, that'll be booth 348 if you go by the maps of the convention hall and stuff.
Yeah.
So it's
I don't think we're right on the thoroughfare this year, but you have to look for us. But all good things are worth the effort.
yeah, it's
the investment. So
seeking out and finding.
seek
it.
and you will find.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, all that aside, why don't we dive into today's episode? Which we're talking about the platforms of leaders. Obviously, the Southern Baptist Convention is a very huge platform.
Yeah.
And I feel like it's maybe appropriate to talk about the various platforms that leaders lead from.
Yeah, and I wrote a blog recently about this, and we'll put this in the show notes as well, so you can access that. I do have a blog site where I post blogs and book reviews. If you haven't been there lately, just want to kind of know stuff I'm reading, and maybe try to give us kind of a summary of books, some of the key quotes that stood out to me, and so all that's on my blog site.
Oh, good. I'll have to check that out sometime.
Yeah, yeah. We need to update it sometime.
Yeah.
So it's William Shakespeare who famously said, "All the world's a stage, and all the men and women merely players. They have their exits and their entrances, and one man in his time plays many parts." And I thought that was very apropos beginning to this subject. All the world is a stage, and especially if you're a leader, that means that you're always going to be on one stage or another. In fact, if you're a Shakespearean actor, you might have one primary stage that you focus on. But as a leader, you've got, I would suggest, at least 4 stages. Some people may have more than that, but certainly 4 stages that are primary. And I think the problem with a lot of leaders is they perform well on 1 or 2 of those stages, but not all 4. And so the key is to have a masterful performance in all 4 stages, not just on one. Otherwise, like we've seen with so many studies of leaders, leaders will have their strengths, their successes, the things they celebrate, But then it seems invariably leaders also have things that they don't do as well at. And it's not necessarily that they couldn't have done well, but that they put all their focus, attention on a particular stage, and then neglected others that perhaps might have even been more important. And so the first stage that I look at is what I call the home stage. And if you're a parent, if you're a father, you're a mother, you, or even if you're married, you have someone who is watching you up close. Your family sits on the front row of every performance that you have. And the problem a lot of times is that you don't get dress rehearsals for this stage. You don't always get all the makeup put on first and all the lighting just right. You're getting up first thing in the morning. You're coming home at the end of a long day. And so your family doesn't always get the stuff with all the costuming and lighting and enhancements that might come if you were backstage in your dressing room first. But in many ways, of course, this is the most important stage because your kids are watching you. And we, of course, have Father's Day coming up here very soon. And that's a time when a lot of fathers have regrets because they got all geared up, dressed up, got on their best behavior as they were going to work to perform on the work stage. But their spouse, their kids, saw them getting ready grumpily in the morning. They hadn't had their coffee yet. Their head might be buried in their phone or in the paper. They're rushing off late, kind of muttering to themselves as they're leaving the house. And that's what their family sees in the morning. And, I found even something as simple, Sam, is just your attitude about your work. If you enjoy work, you get up in the morning, raring to go, feeling positive about what you're doing, coming home at the end of the day. And you might be tired, you put in a hard day's work, but you feel good about what you accomplished. You feel like you put a good day's work into your day. Your kids are watching that. Your kids, they're getting their opinion about work from watching you, how you handle it. And of course, the problem with this particular stage is that it's quite prone to hypocrisy. And so your kids, maybe you're a deacon or an elder in your church, and you get called on to pray on the church platform, and you pray a very sanctimonious, godly prayer using all kinds of highfalutin King James English. But then they hear you around the lunch table later that morning, that afternoon, bad-mouthing what the pastor and his sermon and the church, and your kids are hearing very different performance that reflects on your attitude about the church. They saw you on stage at church, but now they're seeing you performing around the kitchen table, and they're getting a mixed message. And of course, that's always the Achilles heel of so many leaders, is that the home is, they're always prone to hypocrisy because oftentimes we don't give our best on the home stage. We often give our worst. And so I've said before, we can be Superman at work and then we're Clark Kent with an attitude when we get home. And our kids, that's what they see. They don't see us where we're a can-do attitude. We waltz into work and we're smiling, we're upbeat, we're checking in with everybody. People bring us problems and we'll get this figured out. Don't worry. Hey, it's okay. We'll straighten things out here. But then we get home and all that performance goes out the window. Now we're frustrated. We're upset. We're barking out orders. We're belittling. And so really, though, I think the primary stage for us is going to be home, because that stage is the people in that audience ought to be the people that matter most to us. Our kids, our spouse, family. D.L. Moody at one point was, many people say that in his day, he saw over 1 million people come to faith in Christ, largely by what he did on stages around the world, preaching the gospel. But at one point, his son, Will, temporarily at least, left the faith and just started having doubts about his belief in Christ. And that absolutely broke D.L. Moody's heart. He said all the rave reviews that he was getting from stages around the world meant nothing to him. if his own son, who watched him up close, was not convinced in D.L. Moody's God and his beliefs. And I think, in a sense, we all should feel that way. Our greatest performance, the greatest stage we ever perform upon, is the stage in our own home. And so that's the first one. Second stage, I just call the office stage or the workplace stage. It's where a lot of us are going to spend 8 hours or more a day, at least 5 days a week. And of course, there's all kinds of people that are going to be watching us there as well. If you're a pastor, you're literally going to be on stage, perhaps, in front of your congregation, at least once a week. But you're also going to be on stage throughout the week when you have a church member who's in the hospital and they've got to have a tumor removed and they're scared, and they're all of a sudden you walk into their hospital room, and I'll tell you what, the next few moments you're on stage in front of that worried, fearful church member, and you don't want to forget your lines. You don't want to exit left when you're supposed to exit right. You want to make sure you get it right. And the staff that you work with, whether you're in a church or in a business, every day that you have colleagues that work beside you. Maybe they're in the cubicle next to you or the office next to you, or you're in a staff meeting and the people you work with are all watching you. And now there's a problem. You've just lost your best customer, or there's an economic downturn. And now they're all looking to you. If you come in all worried and fretting, looking at help wanted ads to try to find some other line of work, it's going to demoralize all the people that you work with. And there have been times when I've led different organizations, and times were very difficult, and it wasn't necessarily our fault. It just there was a pandemic, there was an economic downturn. Someone had just quit to go work somewhere else. Various things had happened. And everyone's looking to me to say, so Richard, what are we going to do about this? And at that point, I think very much like a stage performer in a Shakespearean play, you've got to dig deep, and you've got to say, so what kind of person do I need to be? I mean, you want to be honest. You know, Sam, you can't just act like everything's fine if it's not. But I think you do have to. I think you do have to dig deep to say, but right now I need to be a confident version of me. I need to be a hopeful version of Richard Blackaby right now. I that can be me. And when I stop and consider how God has always provided, He's always guided, I don't need to be worried and upset. And I would say sometimes if you're about to go into a staff meeting, if you're about to get on stage in front of your church, there are times when I think you just need to quietly just pray to God and just say, God, help me right now to come across the way I need to. Again, you're not faking it, but you're saying, God, I need to really get myself ready so that I am thinking clearly about what these people need from their leader right now, what's true about God and about following Him, and help me just to get that right. Because right now is not a good time to not be at my best. And again, you're always on stage when you're at work, but there are those key moments where all eyes are on you in times of crisis, and especially in those times, or for that matter, in really good times. Maybe your business has just had a record year, and now everybody's looking at you. Are you going to take all the credit? Are you going to share in the blessing with the staff? Are you going to celebrate? Are you going to give people a chance to catch their breath and relax, or are you going to keep pushing for more? And there are just those key moments where you mount the stage as a leader, and you really want to get it right. A lot hinges in those moments on what you do on that stage. And then just a third one that's kind of related to that, but I just call it the customer client stage. It's not your staff, it's not your colleagues, it's the customer, it's the people that you're trying to reach or service, the client. And of course, those are people that you can a colleague is someone that's paid to work with you, perhaps, or maybe a church member that's joined up to be in your church. But clients, customers, those are people you're trying to reach. and they can be very fickle, and you, of course you always want to be at your best in front of those kinds of people. I find again, not everyone is necessarily a gifted public speaker, but one-on-one, there are those moments where you're sitting across the table from a client, a customer, and you've got to give them a great performance of listening to them, caring about them, being interested in their problem and wanting to solve it, remembering details about them. There are moments where I feel like I've blown those moments where I was distracted. I'm racing in. Sometimes you forget someone's name that you should know, and you're thinking, "Oh, I was not ready for this moment." I've often said to people, especially when it comes to your relationship with your family, do you treat your kids, do you treat your spouse like your top customers? Top customers, it's just pretty hard for them to get you upset because no matter what they do, you're going to say it's okay. We're good. We'll work it out. You want to be just so flexible and so understanding and so gracious because you don't want to lose a customer. You don't want them to walk away and go to your competitor. Yeah. And so we can be just so charming and so easygoing. Can you imagine if you treated your spouse and your kids like you treat your best customers, your best donors, that you were always just, everything was good, no matter what happened, no matter what they forgot, no matter how badly that child behaved, that you treated them like your top customer, your top donor, top money-making client. Wouldn't that be something if you treated your friends that way, if you treated others that way? But there is that moment where if you're going to succeed in your work, you have got to be able to put it together. And as you're making that sales pitch, as you're getting up to give that public talk in front of an audience that perhaps doesn't know you very well yet, there are those moments where you've got to dig deep and again have the best version of you in front of all those people. And there's people like famously like Richard Nixon who just didn't really like people. He loved to get on a stage though. He could do that well. He could give a speech on television, but he didn't like to go to staff parties. Didn't like to relate to people one-on-one. And there is a point where at times you've got to do the stage stuff, but also sometimes it comes from just treating people well and treating people in a way that makes friends, makes customers, makes happy clients. And then the last stage I just call the general public stage, and that is that's just the overall reputation you have in the community. If you regularly go to a particular restaurant, I was in Canada recently teaching at the seminary I led for 13 years, and I lived there for 15 years. And 4 mornings in a row, I went to the very same restaurant every morning for breakfast, and every morning I got to know the waitress and the management there, and we would chat and visit and joke. And by four mornings in a row, by the last morning, we're like buddies, we're friends, and of course I'll be back there eventually again, I assume, but it won't be for a little while. But there are places where I live and where I work, where I frequent more often, that you make an impression. And a leader's reputation in a community does matter, especially if you frequent the same businesses. Maybe you hire the same people to do work, maybe landscaping on your property or repairs or whatever it might be. Services that you have done. If I have a dry cleaner, I've gotten to know just certain people that you see, and you just want to regularly put a smile on their face. You want to leave a good impression. Sometimes that can be just leaving a decent tip, a generous tip for services. The Cathy family, Bubba Cathy and his family, they go to our church. I get to see them, and it's just always interesting to me. Of course, he's a wealthy part owner of Chick-fil-A, lots of money, lots of influence. But if you watch him, if you live around that family, you notice things like if you go for dinner with Bubba Cathy or Morris, one of his sons or daughters, it's not uncommon to see them as they get out of their car just picking up some garbage that's blown onto the parking lot. It's not even their restaurant. It's not even their store, but they'll just go around and pick things up, or they'll give a generous tip, or they'll just say something. They'll be very gracious to the person servicing them, and over time you build a reputation. And a lot of times, if this isn't a client of ours, if it's not maybe an employee of ours, sometimes we think it doesn't matter. But I think a lot of times we're not aware how many eyes are watching us, how many people are leaving an impression, are having an impression made about us. And of course, if you're a leader, you represent your organization. And whether someone ever does business with your organization or not, word gets around a community. And so I've just learned it's not as important certainly as your family stage. But I have learned that as a leader, you just can't ever let your guard down. You can't just say, okay, this person doesn't matter. I'm on an airplane on the other side of the country. It doesn't really matter if I'm rude to this flight attendant. Well, it does. You are on a broad stage all the time. You're interacting with other people all the time. And
and I think it's also revealing if there is a person who, in their official capacity is one way, but, when the cameras are off and, when they're around people they'll never see again, if they behave differently, I think that can be very telling of the kind of person that they are. And I think it's not so much you got to keep up with what stage you're on and what I'm doing, but it's, are you a person of integrity,
right.
across these stages?
And ultimately, it's are you, when you're on a stage or off a stage, are you the same person?
Right.
And but to be aware, and why it's so important is because most of the time you are on some stage.
Right.
There are people that are watching you, and you ought to be a person of integrity regardless whether someone's watching you or not. But all the more so you need to be because there are people watching, and it's especially as you have kids. And I'm just very cognizant of this in terms of Father's Day coming up. That especially if you're a father or mother, your parent. Those impressionable eyes. If you've ever had like a 4 or 5 year old child just watching your every move and then just asking them, why did you do that, Dad? why did you do that? Why are you doing it like that? And they're always wanting to know. And you were just trying to get a job done. And all of a sudden you're reminded, oh no, I'm on stage. There's young eyes watching, getting their impression of what work means, about how to have a good attitude. You hurt yourself. I cut my finger the other day. This bread making hobby, one of the downsides, I've cut my thumb twice last week. I sharpened this knife, and I love this kind of hard crust on the sourdough bread, but you kind of have to really hack to cut to get through, and slash myself twice. Well, you're on stage even when you cut yourself, and you may have some kind of foolish accident, and all the ears are listening, the eyes are watching. How does Grandpa handle pain and frustration? And
how does Grandpa handle profuse bleeding? Yeah.
Yeah, that's right.
That's a great test of leader.
And so just really today, I certainly want to just remind you as listeners, we are all on stage. We're all making an impression all the time, whether we want to be or not. And so just be aware of that. Be aware that you're leaving a lasting impression by the way you conduct yourself, and not just so that people think well of you, but if they know you're a Christian, they're going to think well of your God. Scripture says, do everything as unto the Lord, because people are watching, and our behavior does reflect in our God. And so may every performance, every time on stage, put a smile on God's face, because it was one of our greatest performances yet.
Well, good. Well, we'll leave links to the source material for today's podcast. That's your blog called The 4 Platforms of a Leader. We'll leave links to that in the show notes as always. Well, thank Richard. And again, if you're listening to this on the day that it came out, come by and see us at the SBC booth 348 next to the Canadian Baptist Convention, or the Canadian Baptist Seminary.
Thanks for listening to the podcast. If this is something you enjoyed, it really makes a difference if you leave a review and a 5-star rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen. Don't forget to subscribe and share with your friends. We always love hearing from our listeners, so email us at podcast@blackv.org.